The streets of Chicago had a way of shaping a man, and Oliver McCall was no exception. He wasn't born into boxing. He didn't grow up throwing punches in some dirty basement gym, dreaming of championship gold. No, his first love was basketball, and he had the talent to go far. But destiny had other plans. McCall's path zigzagged between two worlds: Wisconsin, where he lived with his mother and made a name for himself on the hardwood, and Chicago, where life had a different challenge waiting. When he returned to the city in 1981, the game changed. The court was replaced by the ring, and instead of perfecting jump shots, he learned how to throw a right hand that could end a fight in an instant. 2 Chicago Golden Gloves titles later, it was clear McCall wasn't just another hopeful stepping between the ropes. He was built for this. The ring had found him, and once he started swinging, the world had no choice but to take notice. The heavyweight division has always been a proving ground where only the toughest survive, and every fight can change a career. Oliver McCall knew this better than most. He wasn't some overnight sensation, knocking out opponents on his way to the top. His path was rough, filled with setbacks that could have broken a lesser man. But McCall, he kept coming. When he turned pro in 1985, the road ahead wasn't easy. He took his early lessons under the watchful eye of a legend, Joe Frazier himself. Still, no name could protect him from the harsh reality of the fight game. He tasted defeat early, losing his second pro fight. Later, he fell short against skilled contenders like Mike Hunter and Buster Douglas. But McCall never let a loss define him. He learned, adjusted, and pressed forward. By the time he stepped in against Al Evans, who once stopped the young Mike Tyson, McCall had developed the kind of grit that couldn't be taught. He outworked Evans, won a decision, and kept climbing. He took down respected names like Jesse Ferguson and Bruce Seldon, proving he belonged among the best. Then came 1992, a razor-thin loss to Tony Tucker that could have derailed everything. But instead of fading into the background, McCall kept his name in the mix. 2 years later, he found himself standing across from Lennox Lewis with the WBC Heavyweight Championship on the line. The moment he had fought for was finally here. The question was, could he seize it? The heavyweight division is a brutal place. One punch can change everything. And on one unforgettable night in 1994, Oliver McCall proved it. Lennox Lewis came in as the undefeated champion, a towering figure expected to dominate. But McCall had other plans. The first round was tense, a battle of inches. Then, in the second, McCall saw his opening. As Lewis stepped forward, McCall let loose his signature counter right hand. It landed clean. Lewis crashed to the canvas. He tried to rise, his body fighting against the shock of the punch. The referee's count went on, but Lewis was unsteady, his legs betraying him. The fight was stopped. Just like that, McCall was the new WBC heavyweight champion. The Lewis camp protested, but at ringside, most agreed the stoppage was fair. The punch had done its job. With that win, Don King was back in control of the heavyweight throne, a seat he had lost when Tyson fell in 1990. And McCall? He wasn't done yet. He took on the legendary Larry Holmes, a former champion at 45, and edged out a close decision to keep his title. Then came Frank Bruno. In 1995, McCall traveled to London. Carrying more than just his championship belt, he carried a grudge. He claimed this was about revenge for America, a response to the tragic fight between Gerald McClellan and Nigel Benn months earlier. McCall promised to punish Bruno, even dismissing his abilities, saying the only thing Bruno could do was throw illegal rabbit punches. The roar of Wembley Stadium echoed through the night as Oliver McCall stepped into the ring, but something was off. This wasn't the same man who had crushed Lennox Lewis with a single punch. This time, McCall looked sluggish, almost indifferent, while Frank Bruno came to fight. Bruno controlled the early rounds with a sharp jab and heavy right hands. He piled up points, round after round, while McCall seemed content to coast. By the ninth, the scorecards were heavily in Bruno's favor. The title was slipping away. Then, in the 10th, something changed. Maybe McCall finally realized what was at stake. Or maybe instinct took over. He came alive, throwing bombs and pushing Bruno to the brink. The crowd held its breath as McCall rocked the challenger again and again. But Bruno refused to fall. He held on, surviving the late storm to win the fight by unanimous decision. With that, history was made. McCall became the first heavyweight champion to both win and lose the title to a British fighter. the first American to both claim and surrender the belt in Europe. But McCall wasn't done. Just 6 months later, he returned with a point to prove, stopping future WBC champion Oleg Maskiv in under 3 minutes. A month later, he racked up another win against James Stanton. The fire was back, and McCall was ready to chase the title once more. The rematch was supposed to settle everything. 3 years had passed since Oliver McCall shocked the world by knocking out Lennox Lewis. Now, in Las Vegas, Lewis was back for revenge, stronger, sharper, and determined to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. But as the fight played out, it became clear that something was terribly wrong. McCall started well enough, trading shots and moving with purpose. But then, in the third round, his energy shifted. He stopped throwing punches. He stepped back, dropped his hands, and stared across the ring as if his mind was somewhere else. By the fourth, the crowd murmured in confusion. McCall still wasn't fighting. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't out of breath. He just wasn't there. And then, something no one expected: tears. Right in the middle of the fight, McCall began crying. Legendary referee Mills Lane watched in disbelief. Was McCall playing possum? Was it some kind of strange strategy? But then Lane saw the trembling lips, the distant look in McCall's eyes. This wasn't a mind game. It was something deeper. By the fifth round, McCall still refused to defend himself. Lane had no choice. He waved off the fight, giving Lewis the TKO victory in one of the strangest endings ever seen in a heavyweight title bout. Instead of the explosive battle fans had anticipated, they got a moment that would be talked about for years: of fight not lost by knockout, but by something no one could quite explain. Some fighters fade away quietly. Oliver McCall was not one of them. At 36, his best years should have been behind him. He had already climbed the mountain, shocked the world, and lost it all. But in 2001, against all odds, he stepped back into the ring and knocked out Henry Akinwanda, towering, awkward contender most heavyweights wanted no part of. Just like that, McCall was back in the mix, ranked number 4 in the world. Then, just as quickly as he had risen, trouble found him again. Arrested and locked away for over a year, his ranking disappeared, and his momentum was gone. Most assumed his career was over. But McCall had never done things the easy way. By 2006, he was back in the hunt, tearing through opponents and collecting belts. One by one, he racked up wins, stopping Darrell Wilson, knocking out Yankee Diaz, and outlasting Sinan Samulsam for the WBC International Heavyweight Championship. His name was once again floating around title conversations. Even as years passed, McCall refused to fade. In 2009, he added another belt to his collection by demolishing John Hopoate in 2 rounds. He defended his title twice that year, grinding out victories against Franklin Lawrence and the towering Lance Whitaker. But every comeback has its limits. When he faced Timur Ibragimov, a solid contender with just 2 losses, McCall finally met a hurdle he couldn't clear. Over 10 rounds, Ibragimov outboxed him, handing McCall his first defeat since his return. For most fighters, that would have been the end. But McCall was never like most fighters. Some fighters battle their opponents. Others battle themselves. Oliver McCall did both. Inside the ring, he was a man who could take anyone's best shot and keep coming. He knocked out Lennox Lewis, pushed legends to their limits, and refused to go quietly, even as the years stacked against him. But outside the ropes, the fight was different. It was a war he couldn't win with a single punch. Drugs, arrests, and legal troubles followed him like a shadow. In 2006, he was tossed by police in Nashville after trying to flee an arrest. When officers searched him, they found a crack pipe and a small stash of cocaine. In a rage, McCall spat at one of them, threatening to kill him. He was booked on multiple charges, his bond set at nearly $300,000. For months later, he was out, but the cycle continued. A scheduled fight against Zuri Lawrence was scrapped when he was arrested again, this time in Fort Lauderdale. Caught with cocaine just days before stepping into the ring. He avoided serious prison time and was placed on probation, a lifeline that kept his career from vanishing completely. Somehow, he still found a way back to the ring. In 2010, against the odds, he edged out a split decision over Friso Quendo, proving that even at his lowest, he could still compete. But just 2 days later, he was arrested again, this time for marijuana possession, a violation of his probation. Now, he faced 6 years in prison. His legal team fought hard, managing to keep him out of a long sentence. Instead, he was placed in treatment, forced to confront the demons that had followed him for decades. A year later, his probation was officially over. For most fighters, the final bell comes in the ring. For McCall, it was never that simple. His greatest fights weren't just against champions, they were against himself.